You don't need more tools, you just need better jigs. Okay, so our first jig is going to help you make those angled cuts and miters, and it's simply called a miter sled, and is great for picture frames or 90-degree angles. For our first jig, I'm actually using 1/2-inch plywood instead of 3/4 because I have an 8¼ inch table saw, so I don't have as much clearance room. I'm going to be cutting the base to be 16 by 20 inches. Now I'm going to make a partial cut through that base so that I have a 90-degree line and I know exactly where it's going to be. I'm using a 1/2-inch plywood, so I'm going to glue up 2 sheets so I have an inch-thick fence. And while that's drying, let's scribe our marks. Now I'm going to actually use this speed square when I'm assembling everything, but it's always a good idea to put some marks on there just so you've got a point of reference. And I'll place it back on there and actually clamp it down now that that fence is dry and ready to be glued on. Now I will screw it on from the bottom later on, don't worry about that. It's not going to be held on with just glue. Now notice that the fence is actually going to be positioned so that it crosses over that cut line. Now that's important because we'll cut that off in just a few minutes. All right, for the runners, which are actually going to fit into the miter slots and allow the sleds to slide, some people will use plywood or hardwood, but actually I'm going to use a leftover sheet of laminate. We built this house just about 5 years ago, and we've got a few sheets left over. This stuff is nice and smooth. It's very hard like a hardwood, and it slides incredibly easy. I've used this on jigs before, and I actually kind of like it. So if you have any leftover laminate from any type of job that you do in your house, consider holding on to it for this type of a project. All right, I'm going to use CA glue and some accelerant to place the base onto these runners. Now place it on the blade so that way you can make sure that it lines up at the perfect angle. And once I've got that done, let me raise my blade and I'm going to cut that fence off. It comes to a nice point. Now, it's at this point that I realize that my blade won't go up high enough to cut that all the way off, so I'll just use a pull saw to finish cutting that off. And then I'll take my other piece and go ahead and cut it. Now, here's the pull saw in action. I'll go ahead and cut that off so I can assemble, but the first cut that I make, it'll take care of that, no problem. Now for this final assembly, I am going to use a square. Get it in place and then make sure that that glue holds, and I'm just going to cover it up and put a little bit of weight on there, and I'll go back and I'll screw those in better later. And from there, let's make some test cuts. Now we'll come back to these test cuts a little bit later because we're actually going to use this with our next jig as well. Now our next jig is going to be a spline jig. A spline is a thin insert of wood that goes inside of your miter joint. Splines actually make your joints stronger and add a nice little accent when you use different species of wood that contrast one another. Now depending on the dimensions of your table saw fence, you may need to make this different size, but I'm going to make mine with a 3.5-inch piece wood for the back, 4-inch top piece, and then an 11 by 11 face. I'll mark everything off, pre-drill my holes to make it easier to assemble, and then clamp everything to the fence so I can get a nice tight fit, and then simply screw everything together. And believe it or not, at this point, we're almost done. Now check to make sure that your jig does move freely along that fence. And if you have this model table saw, there's a little lip right there. So make sure that your jig is tall enough so that it doesn't get hung up there. From there, I'm going to measure the center point of my face and then make sure that we have that at a perfect 45-degree angle. Then it's just simply putting in a couple of pieces that are going to hold our frames while we're cutting the spline. So let's clamp that square in place, screw in these other 2 small pieces, and we're almost done. Just to clean it up a little bit, I'm going to cut off these corners that are sticking out. and then we're ready to give it a shot. Now, if you'd like to clamp your frames in, you can, but I'm just going to hold it in place right there. Make sure to keep your fingers very far away. Now it's time to put everything together. Let's put a little glue inside that spline joint hole, whatever you want to call it. Put a piece of wood, I'm using walnut, that's cut to the same thickness as the kerf of my blade. Using just a simple table straw to get rid of the excess glue so that I have less that I have to get rid of. And then we'll let it dry. Once it's dry, use the cutting tool of your choice to get rid of the excess spline. Sand it off just a little bit to clean it up. And now you have a beautiful mitered joint with a nice little spline accent. If you are trying to cut this piece of wood at this angle, you do not want to try to slide it through like this, because if a piece of wood is wider than it is long, it has more of a tendency to rack or kind of twist as you're pushing it through. It's harder to keep it straight. It's easier to keep something straight like this and keep it from racking. But if it's very wide, then you run the risk of it racking. And imagine this flying back into this pretty face at about 100 miles an hour. I wouldn't like it, and I know you wouldn't. So let's build our crosscut sled. When you cut your runners, you want them to be tight inside those miter slots, but not so tight that they get stuck. I usually cut them a little bit too wide and then sneak up on them to get them down where I want. And once I have that done, let's glue everything together. Now, always use that accelerant because it makes it dry incredibly fast. We'll screw them in later. Oh yeah, I guess now is later. And I'm going to go ahead and paint a small piece, a very bright red pinkish color. You'll see why here in just a couple of minutes. I'm just going to scribe a line so I know approximately where my back piece should go. And we are going to screw in only one side so that we can pivot it and make sure that we get it at an exact 90-degree angle. Now, I recommend that you use as long of a square as you can, because if you use a long square and you back that back piece all the way up, the farther you go up that square, the more obvious any imperfection will be. So if you're even a ½ degree off, you'll see it. Once we have it where we want it, let's screw in that other side, and it should be nice and square for us. So I'll just check it right here, and 90 degrees no matter how far back I pull it. Got to go ahead and pre-drill some holes and place the front piece on there. Now, I've seen some crosscut sleds that actually don't have a front piece, but I like to put that front piece on there. It just makes it a little bit more stable. And now this is why we have that colored piece that's nice and bright red. This is going to be a no-go zone, so I know not to put my thumbs anywhere near the blade in case I push all the way through. Now, I have measured it so I know it's centered, even though I didn't show you that. It's at this point that I realized, oh wait, I wanted to put a piece of T-track on there so that I could put a stop block. Okay, so I suggested that the only power tool that you'd need to create these jigs was a table saw, but I'm gonna use my router table to route a couple of things out, but that's not a big deal. If you don't have a router table, then you can just simply use your table saw as a router table. Just cut an 1/8 or a 1/4 inch cut, however deep you need, in your table saw, and then scoot the fence in a little bit and make those cuts until you get it to the width that you need. So I take it over to my router table, and I put a small rabbet in there so that I can put a stop block. Now we'll reassemble. I'm not going to show you me squaring it up again, but rest assured that I did. This is a Cat's Moses stop block. You don't have to get anything like this. You can just simply use a piece of wood and a clamp if you'd like to, but I had this stop block already, so I'm going to use it. In case you're unfamiliar with the stop block, what it allows you to do is it allows you to put a stop in a particular location so that you can cut multiple pieces at the exact same thickness without having to remeasure every time. And that's really all there is to it. So let's give it a shot and see how it works. And there we go. Perfect, repeatable cuts with our crosscut sled. All right, now comes our final jig, which is really the one that I'm most excited about. This is commonly referred to as a tenoning jig, but really it's so much more. I actually don't cut a lot of tenons. However, I do make a lot of angled cuts, and I don't have a big bandsaw that can be used to resaw wood. So this is the type of jig that can be used to more safely use your table saw to resaw wood. So let's get to work. To begin with, let's cut our wood down to size. Isn't this awesome? I'm using a table saw jig to make another table saw jig. Come on, that's pretty badass. So I'm gonna need 3 pieces, and I'm gonna build that fence just like I did when I made my spline jig. So I'm just gonna zip through this. Now I am making this 12 inches tall by 15 inches wide, just so you know. Now I'm going to route out some spots for T-track. Now you can configure the T-track however you'd like. You don't even have to include T-track, but I recommend doing it. And remember, if you don't have a router like I do, you can always use your table saw as a rabbiting tool. Now it's at this point that I realize that the screws are a little bit too long for the thickness of my plywood because I cut that rabbet into it. So I'm going to have to put something on the back so that I don't stab my fingers. So instead of putting an entire piece, I just thought I'd make some little racing stripes out of some leftover spalted maple. And once I have everything in place, let's screw everything together. Now I should have clamped it to get a tighter fit. I'll go back and do that next time. Now all we have to do is cut a piece of wood for our sacrificial backer, which is going to hold that wood in place when you're cutting it. Now, don't screw too far close to the bottom, because if you do, then your blade is going to run into that screw. And that's really all there is to it. For our first test, we are going to cut at an angle depth, cutting some walnut here. And you'll notice that, boom, we have a perfect angle cut. Now, if you wanted to cut it on all 4 sides, you can easily just spin that around so that you can cut all 4 sides for a nice little accent. And what I mainly use it for is for resawing wood. If I need to thin down my wood and I don't want to put it through the planer over and over again, I'll just resaw it. Make sure you clamp it in place because that's going to keep everything safer. Then cut through on one side, raising the blade about 1 inch every time, then just simply flip it over. Now, I don't recommend that you try to go all the way through. I recommend that you leave a little bit holding those 2 pieces together and then just use a screwdriver or just use your fingers to kind of work it loose. And then you can use a hand plane to cut off that little piece of leftover wood that's going to be right there. Well, there you go, and I hope you got something useful out of this. I'd love to hear down in the comments what types of jigs that you use the most in your shop. And if you want to see how to joint wood without a jointer using only your planer, check out this video right here.